I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. When I stepped into that courtroom, my daughter Emily rolled her eyes and leaned toward her husband, James, whispering something that made them both smirk. But then something unexpected happened. The judge lifted his head from his stack of papers, his eyes locking on me. His expression froze as if the past had walked right into the room. "It's her," he said in a hushed voice, barely audible. The entire courtroom went silent. Lawyers paused mid-sentence. Clerks stopped typing. Even the bailiff shifted nervously. Emily's smug look wavered, and James frowned with confusion. They had no idea what those two words meant, but I did. I had lived long enough to recognize when fate was about to turn. They thought I was just an old woman clinging to a house. They believed they had stripped me of every ounce of dignity. What they never realized was that I carried a story much older, much stronger than their greed. Every morning in Riverton began the same way for me. I rose at 6 a.m., filled my old kettle with water, and reached for the chipped blue mug that had survived more than 20 years of breakfasts. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen while I checked on the African violets lined up on the windowsill. My late husband, William, loved those flowers, and tending to them kept him close to me even after he was gone. My life wasn't extraordinary. It was a rhythm of small habits, each one stitched with memory and meaning. I had never traveled far or lived in luxury, but I had poured every ounce of myself into raising my daughter, Emily. I worked late nights cleaning offices, sold homemade pies at church events, and mended dresses for neighbors, all to make sure she had opportunities I never knew. To most people, I was just a quiet grandmother with silver hair and hands that showed years of hard work. But in my heart, I carried decades of sacrifice that no one could see. That Thursday evening was meant to be special. I had spent hours preparing William's favorite chicken and dumplings, the dish Emily used to beg for as a child. My fingers ached from rolling the dough, but it was a good kind of ache, the kind that comes from creating something with love. I laid out my embroidered tablecloth, the one I had worked on when Emily was a teenager, and placed fresh daisies in the center of the table. I wanted to remind her that this was still her home, filled with love and memories. When they arrived, James walked straight to William's old armchair, switched on the television, and acted as if the house belonged to him. He was a tall man with carefully styled dark hair, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Emily stood there in the green dress I had bought her for Christmas, her expression as cold as winter air. "Mom, we need to talk," she said in a clipped tone that made her sound like a stranger. I noticed James mute the television but not turn it off, his attention divided between us and whatever game was playing. "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything okay?" I motioned toward the kitchen. "Dinner's almost ready. I made your favorite—" "This isn't a social call," James interrupted, his voice slicing through my words. "We have important matters to discuss." Emily didn't even flinch at his rudeness. Instead, she nodded as if he'd said something profound. "Mom," she continued, "the house is too big for you. You can't maintain it anymore. And James and I need it for our growing family." My hands trembled slightly as I folded them in my lap. "What are you saying?" "Emily," James leaned forward, "we found a retirement community perfect for someone your age. All your basic needs will be taken care of, and you'll have people around you. It's the sensible choice." "But this is my home," I said, my voice catching. "Your father died in this house, holding my hand. Every wall carries our story." Emily's face remained unmoved. "Memories are in the heart, Mom, not on the walls." "We've already started the paperwork," James added, pulling out a folder from his briefcase. "The community has a waiting list, but I've arranged to move you to the front of the line. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word hung in the air between us, sharp and insulting. "I'm not leaving my home," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. James's smile disappeared. "Linda, be reasonable. You're getting older. Just last month, you fell in the garden. What if something happens when no one's around?" I wanted to remind him that I'd only stumbled because the sidewalk was uneven, and I'd caught myself before falling, but I knew it wouldn't matter. They'd already decided my fate without me. "The chicken and dumplings will get cold," I said instead, rising from my chair. "Let's eat first, then talk." Emily exchanged a look with James that made my heart sink. I'd seen that look before, the silent communication between them whenever they thought I was being difficult. As I brought the food to the table, I noticed Emily hadn't set out 3 plates as I'd asked. She'd only set 2. They weren't staying for dinner. They hadn't planned to all along. A few days later, James arrived without warning, bringing along a real estate appraiser in a gray suit. The man walked through my house as if it were already for sale. He measured rooms with quick, detached movements and scribbled notes on a clipboard. "The pipes are outdated," he said flatly. "The kitchen tiles are old-fashioned. This place would need a full renovation." I stood silently in the corner, clutching the edge of my apron. Those tiles he dismissed so casually had been placed one by William's hands when Emily was 10. I remembered the sweat on his brow, the patience in his smile, the hope in his voice as he told me, "This kitchen will last us a lifetime." And now it was being reduced to a line on a checklist. The appraiser poked at the living room ceiling. "Water damage here. Likely roof issues." "That's from when the neighbor's pipe burst last winter," I explained. "It's been fixed. Mrs. Patterson can confirm. We'll need to factor in roof replacement costs anyway." He continued as if I hadn't spoken. Emily followed the appraiser, nodding at his comments, never once looking at me. Each word felt like a hammer striking the walls of my heart. My home was no longer sacred to them. It was only property, numbers, and profit. Mrs. Patterson appeared at the back door, holding a plate of cookies. She took one look at the scene and frowned. "Linda, is everything all right?" she asked, her eyes tracking the appraiser as he measured the door frames. Before I could answer, James stepped between us. "Family business, ma'am. Linda's moving to a retirement community. We're just getting the house ready to sell." Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened, and she looked to me for confirmation. The shame of it, having my neighbors learn about these plans before I'd even agreed to them, burned my cheeks. "Nothing's decided yet," I managed to say. "Actually, it is," Emily replied coldly. "Mom just hasn't accepted it yet." Mrs. Patterson set the cookies down and squeezed my hand. "Call me later," she whispered before leaving. After they left, I sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of strangers who had invaded my space. Footprints on my clean floor, curtains left open when they had been closed. Even the air smelled different, of cologne and indifference. I picked up the phone to call Mrs. Patterson, but as I dialed, I saw Emily had left her scarf on the chair, a light blue cashmere scarf I'd saved for months to buy her when she got her first teaching job. Now she was married to James. She'd quit teaching. She said it was her choice, but I always wondered. I folded the scarf carefully and placed it by the door. Even now, I couldn't help but mother her. The following week, they returned with a lawyer in tow. James carried himself like a man already in possession of the house. While Emily avoided meeting my eyes, the lawyer spread a stack of documents across my dining table and spoke with rehearsed politeness. "Mrs. Smith, these are the transfer papers. Once you sign, the property will be in safe hands. Everything has been arranged for your comfort." I scanned the pages, the words blurring together. Transfer of ownership. Permanent. Irrevocable. My chest tightened as I realized this was not about selling the house to someone new. This was about taking it for themselves. "I need time to review these," I said, reaching for my reading glasses. "And I'd like my own lawyer to look them over." James laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Linda, that's not necessary. We've taken care of everything." "Still, I'd prefer to have someone look at them on my behalf," I insisted. The lawyer, Gregory Peters according to his card, glanced at James with obvious discomfort. "Mrs. Smith, the retirement community spot won't be held indefinitely. This is a time-sensitive matter." When I refused to sign, James's polite mask slipped. His tone hardened. "You're not in a condition to make decisions anymore. Linda, Emily is your heir. She's acting in your best interest." "My condition," I repeated, feeling a flush of anger. "I'm perfectly capable, the lawyer added quietly. If you don't cooperate, we may have to consider proceedings for mental incapacity. The room spun. My own daughter, the child I had worked myself ragged to raise, was preparing to strip me of everything I had left. My hands shook, but I forced the words out. I'm not signing anything. And if you threaten me again, I'll call the police. Now please, leave my house. James stood up, his face red. This is a mistake, Linda. We're trying to help you. Help me? My voice was steadier than I expected. By taking my home, by declaring me incompetent. Emily finally spoke, her voice tight. Mom, you're being unreasonable. We're worried about you living alone. If you were worried, you'd visit more than twice a year. You'd call me on days that aren't holidays. You'd ask what I want instead of deciding for me. Emily's face paled, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of shame. But then James placed his hand on her shoulder, and whatever doubt she felt vanished. We'll be back, Linda, James said as they gathered their papers. And next time, we won't be asking. That night, sleep would not come. I sat in William's armchair, the silence of the house pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder if they were right. Maybe I was too old, too fragile, too useless to stand in their way. The thought cut deeper than any insult James had ever thrown at me. My eyes wandered to the framed photos on the wall. Emily as a baby in my arms. William smiling at her graduation. Our family gathered around Christmas dinner. Every memory told me I had lived for others, given everything. Now I was being treated like a burden. William, I whispered into the quiet, I don't know how to fight this alone. The next afternoon, as I wandered through the house like a ghost, I opened William's old desk drawer. It was mostly filled with faded bills, envelopes, and letters I had seen before. But tucked beneath them was a slim folder bound with a tiny lock. My breath caught. I had never noticed it in all these years. I searched the drawers, then the shelves, until I found a small brass key hidden inside one of William's favorite books about investing. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The folder creaked open, and inside was a stack of documents neatly arranged with William's initials on the corner. Most pages were contracts and statements I didn't fully understand, but one caught my attention instantly. It was a will, signed and dated just 6 months before William had passed. I sank into the chair as I began to read, line by line. My reality shifted. William had been far more careful, far more deliberate than I had ever realized. And what Emily and James thought they could take from me was only a shadow of what William had left behind. William had never spoken much about money. I thought we lived on his modest salary and the little I earned from odd jobs. But as I flipped through the folder, the truth unfolded before me. For decades, he had quietly invested every extra dollar, buying small properties when prices were low, putting money into company stocks, even purchasing a piece of land outside Riverton that was now worth a fortune. The numbers on the statements made my head spin, but the greatest shock was yet to come. The building where Emily and James lived, the place they thought they were paying rent for each month, was ours. All those checks had been funneled into an account under William's name, now mine. For 2 years since his death, rent from every tenant had been quietly deposited, untouched, waiting for me. My heart pounded as I realized I wasn't just a widow clinging to a single house. William had left me an empire my daughter and her husband knew nothing about. At the bottom of the folder was an envelope addressed in William's familiar handwriting. My fingers shook as I unfolded the letter, and his voice seemed to rise from the page. My dearest Linda, if you are reading this, then I am no longer by your side. Forgive me for keeping this secret, but I wanted it to be a gift for your later years. You worked harder than anyone I've ever known, and you gave everything for Emily and me. I wanted you to live without fear, to know you would always be safe. I must also tell you I never fully trusted James. There is something in him that worries me, an ambition that has no heart. That is why I arranged the inheritance as I did. If Emily treats you with love and respect, she will share in this legacy. If not, you hold all the power to protect yourself. Use it wisely. Not to hurt, but to teach. All my love. William, tears streamed down my face as I held his letter. Even from beyond, William was protecting me. I had never felt so loved and so devastated at the same time. Why had our daughter become someone who would threaten her own mother? Where had we gone wrong? I carefully replaced the documents in the folder and locked it. Then I picked up the phone and dialed a number I found on one of the investment statements. Riverton Financial Services, Olivia West speaking. I took a deep breath. Ms. West, my name is Linda Smith. My husband was William Smith. I've just found some documents I'd like to discuss with you. There was a moment of silence. Then a warm voice replied, Mrs. Smith, we've been waiting for your call for a very long time. The next morning, I walked into Riverton Financial Services wearing my best dress, a simple navy blue outfit I saved for special occasions. The receptionist led me to a private office where a woman in her 50s stood to greet me. Mrs. Smith, I'm Olivia West. It's an honor to finally meet you. Her handshake was firm, her eyes kind but shrewd. She didn't look at me the way most people looked at older women, with impatience or condescension. She saw me. Please, call me Linda, I said, taking a seat across from her desk. Linda, then, I worked with William for over 20 years. He spoke of you often and with great admiration. I placed the folder on her desk. I found this yesterday. I had no idea. Olivia nodded, not surprised. William wanted it that way. He said you'd work yourself to the bone for others if you knew there was money. He wanted you to slow down, to enjoy life. She opened her computer and turned the screen toward me. Let me show you what you own. Linda? For the next hour, Olivia walked me through a list of assets that left me breathless. Apartment buildings, commercial properties, stock portfolios, savings accounts, all in my name, managed quietly by William's trusted team at Riverton Financial. The Parkview Apartments where my daughter lives, I asked, still struggling to believe. Yes, that's one of your properties. 12 units, fully occupied. Your son-in-law's rent checks go directly into your holding account. And they have no idea. None. William set up a management company as a buffer. The tenants deal with them, not you directly. I sat back, overwhelmed. Why wouldn't he tell me any of this? Olivia's expression softened. He did plan to tell you, but then his health declined so quickly. In his final weeks, he made me promise to look after you, to wait until you came to us. She pulled out another folder. There's something else you should know. William was concerned about your son-in-law. He asked us to look into James's background. My stomach tightened. What did you find? Nothing criminal, but concerning patterns. Before marrying Emily, James had significant gambling debts. He's been involved in several questionable investment schemes. And he's currently facing financial pressure. His company is downsizing, and his position is vulnerable. The pieces fell into place. James's sudden interest in my house, the rush to get me to sign papers, the threats of declaring me incompetent. He's desperate for money, I whispered. Olivia nodded. And he likely sees your house as an easy target. What about Emily? Is she part of this? From what we've observed, she follows his lead. William was concerned about her judgment when it came to James. I thought about my daughter's cold eyes at our last meeting, how she'd stood by silently while James threatened me. It broke my heart, but I couldn't deny the truth. What should I do? I asked. Olivia leaned forward. That depends on what you want, Linda. You have options now, many options. As we continued talking, a plan began to form. I wouldn't just protect myself. I would reclaim my dignity and maybe, just maybe, save my daughter from the man who was using her. When I left Olivia's office, I felt different, straighter, stronger. The weight of fear had lifted, replaced by a calm determination I hadn't felt in years. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. Mrs. Patterson was there, selecting oranges. Linda, she called, hurrying over. I've been worried sick. What happened with your daughter and that awful man? I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes. Things are about to change, Dorothy, in ways nobody expects. She studied my face. You look different today, like your old self. I feel like my old self, I replied. Actually, I feel even better. That night, I brewed my evening tea and watered William's violets as usual. But this time, I didn't feel like a woman waiting for the end. I felt like a woman about to begin again. By dawn, I had made my decision. The tears from the night before had dried, replaced by a calm I hadn't felt in years. I brewed my coffee, watered the violets, and set the folder of documents neatly on William's old desk. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady, almost unshakable. When Emily and James arrived that morning with boxes and movers, expecting me to be packed and ready, they found me sitting in my armchair, sipping tea as if nothing in the world could bother me. "Mom, what are you doing?" Emily asked impatiently. "The movers are here." "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice even. James smirked, stepping closer, his tone sharp. "Mrs. Smith, you don't have a choice." I met his eyes directly, refusing to look away. "You're right, James. I don't have a choice. But it turns out you don't either." The mover stood awkwardly in the hallway, waiting for instructions. James waved his hand toward them as if signaling troops. "Go on, start with the living room," he barked. "Not so fast," I interrupted, rising slowly from my chair. I walked to William's desk and picked up one of the deeds. "Did you know," I asked calmly, "that the apartment you've been living in for 3 years has never really belonged to you?" James's smirk faltered. "We pay rent every month," Emily said, confused. "Yes," I replied, "to a management company that transfers it directly to me because I own the entire building." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the creak of the movers shifting on their feet. Emily stared at the paper in my hand, reading it again and again. James grabbed it from her, his face turning pale as the truth sank in. "This has to be fake," he snapped. "You're bluffing." "Check the records yourself," I said evenly. "You'll find I'm not bluffing at all." James's voice rose, anger spilling through his teeth. "Even if this is true, you can't stop us. We'll fight it in court. You'll lose everything." I folded my hands in front of me. "On the contrary, you have 30 days to find another place to live. After that, the law allows me to evict you." Emily gasped, her eyes filling with panic. "Mom, you can't mean that. Family doesn't scheme to take away what isn't theirs," I answered firmly. "You made your choice when you tried to push me out." James, desperate now, blurted out, "Tell her, Emily. Tell her why she can't do this." Emily's lips trembled. "Mom, I'm pregnant." The words pierced me deeper than any threat. I would be a grandmother, yet I was finding out like this, used as a bargaining chip. For a brief moment, my resolve wavered, but then William's letter echoed in my mind. Use it not to hurt, but to teach. I straightened my shoulders. "Congratulations, Emily, but that doesn't erase what you've done." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears as she turned toward James. "Maybe we should just apologize. Try to make this right." James's face hardened. "I will never bow to her. She's manipulating you." "She's manipulating all of us." I stood quietly, letting his words hang in the air. The truth was finally showing itself. "James, please," Emily pleaded, clutching his arm. "She's my mother. We can't throw her out like garbage." "No," he barked, shaking her hand away. "You're weak if you give in." In that moment, I saw something shift in Emily. For years, she had echoed his voice, mirrored his disdain. Now, she was staring at him as if she truly saw him for the first time. She turned back to me, her voice trembling. "Mom, I was wrong. I let him convince me that you were a burden, and I believed him because it was easier than admitting I married the wrong man." I swallowed hard. "Words are a beginning, Emily, but only actions will show me you've chosen differently." That afternoon, when James had stormed out and the movers had gone, Emily sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands clasped tightly together. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "You start by telling me the truth." I said, "All of it," and so she did. How James had lost his job 6 months ago but kept pretending to go to work. How they were behind on credit card payments. How he'd convinced her that my house was the solution to their problems. He said we'd sell it and use the money to start fresh, she explained, her voice small. But he also talked about how you weren't safe living alone. And you believed him. I wanted to, she admitted. It was easier than facing what our life had become. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time we'd truly touched in years. The baby, I asked gently. It's real, she said, a hint of a smile breaking through her tears. 3 months along. Despite everything, joy stirred within me. A grandchild, a new beginning. Emily, you have choices to make, I said. And they won't be easy, she nodded, squeezing my hand. I know. You can stay here tonight, I told her. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. That night, as I prepared the guest room for Emily, I found myself humming, an old habit I'd lost somewhere along the way. The house felt different with my daughter under its roof again. Even under these circumstances, there was hope in the air, fragile but real. I placed a vase of fresh violets on her nightstand, a peace offering of sorts. Then I sat down at William's desk and wrote a list of what needed to be done. This was just the beginning of a long journey back to family, to trust, to love. But for the first time in years, I wasn't walking it alone. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and tell me which city you're watching from. 2 weeks had passed since that confrontation in my living room. Emily had moved into the guest bedroom temporarily, while James had refused to speak to either of us. The pregnancy had brought morning sickness that left Emily pale and tired most days. But there was something else different about her. A quietness. A thoughtfulness I hadn't seen since before she married James. I'd spent those 2 weeks meeting with Olivia West regularly, learning about my finances, understanding the extent of what William had built. Each revelation felt like getting to know my husband all over again. His foresight, his quiet determination, his love expressed through protection rather than words. Your net worth is substantial, Linda, Olivia explained during one of our meetings. You could live quite comfortably for several lifetimes. The number she showed me on paper seemed impossible. I'd spent decades pinching pennies, working extra shifts, worrying about electricity bills. And all that time, William had been creating this safety net. Why wouldn't he tell me? I asked Olivia for perhaps the 10th time. She smiled patiently. William knew you, Linda. He knew you'd never stop working, never stop giving everything away. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of when he couldn't do it himself anymore. That evening, as Emily and I sat in the living room, she reading a pregnancy book, me knitting what would become a baby blanket, the doorbell rang. I'll get it, I said, setting my knitting aside. When I opened the door, James stood there, his appearance shocking me. Gone was the polished businessman in expensive suits. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes rumpled, his usually perfect hair uncombed. I need to speak to my wife, he demanded, his words slightly slurred. James, you've been drinking, I said firmly. This isn't a good time. He tried to push past me, but I stood my ground. Let me in, Linda. This is still my family. Not when you're like this, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. Come back tomorrow when you're sober. Mom, who is it? Emily appeared behind me, her face draining of color when she saw James. What are you doing here? So it's true, James spat. You've moved in with her, chosen her over me. Emily stepped forward, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach in a protective gesture. I needed time to think. James, you weren't exactly being reasonable. Reasonable, he laughed bitterly. We're about to lose everything, and you're worried about being reasonable. I glanced at Emily, seeing confusion cross her face. What do you mean, lose everything? She asked. James ran a hand through his disheveled hair. The bank called. They're foreclosing on the cabin. What cabin? Emily's voice rose in pitch. James, we don't own a cabin. His eyes darted between us, suddenly wary. The investment property. The one up at Lake Morrison. Emily shook her head slowly. This is the first I'm hearing about any cabin. James. The realization hit me then. James had been hiding more than just unemployment from my daughter. There were secrets upon secrets. Perhaps we should all sit down, I suggested, stepping aside. But only if you can be civil, James. He nodded stiffly, and I led him into the house that just weeks ago he'd tried to take from me. The three of us sat in the living room, the tension so thick it seemed to press against my skin. Emily perched on the edge of the sofa, as far from James as possible. I took William's old armchair, drawing strength from the familiar feel of the worn upholstery beneath my fingers. Start from the beginning, James, I said. The whole truth this time. He looked trapped, like a cornered animal. I was trying to provide for our family, he began, his voice defensive. Make investments that would secure our future. By hiding things from me, Emily interjected. By lying about where our money was going. You wouldn't have understood, James snapped. You're too cautious, too afraid of risk. Sometimes you have to gamble big to win big. Is that what happened to your job? I asked quietly. A gamble that didn't pay off. James's head whipped toward me, surprise evident in his expression. How did you... I know many things now. James, I said, thinking of the detailed reports Olivia had shared with me. I know about the gambling debts, the failed investments, the job you lost 6 months ago. Emily gasped. 6 months? You told me it was just last month. I was handling it, James insisted, his hands clenching into fists. I had plans. The cabin was going to be our fresh start. A cabin you bought without telling me, Emily said, her voice trembling with anger. Using money we didn't have. I put it in my name to surprise you, James said, but the excuse sounded hollow even to my ears. It needed work, but it would have been worth triple in a few years. And in the meantime, I asked, how were you planning to pay for it? His eyes slid away from mine, and in that moment, I knew. My house, I said. You were counting on selling my house to cover your debts. It was a temporary solution, James muttered. Until my investments matured. Emily stood up suddenly, her face flushed with anger. Investments, is that what you call betting on those horses in Atlantic City? Or the cryptocurrency scheme you lost thousands on last year? I watched as years of deception unraveled between them. Every revelation seemed to straighten Emily's spine a little more, her voice growing stronger as James's excuses grew weaker. You used me, she said finally. You used me to try to get to my mother's house. That's not fair, James protested. I love you, Emily. Everything I did was for us, for our future. Was getting my mother declared mentally incompetent also for our future? Emily's voice was ice. Was threatening her part of your grand plan for our happiness? James had no answer for that. He looked smaller somehow, shrinking under the weight of his exposed lies. I think you should leave now, I said quietly but firmly. Emily needs rest. This stress isn't good for the baby. He stood, swaying slightly. This isn't over, he said, but the threat in his words was undermined by the defeat in his eyes. After he left, Emily collapsed onto the sofa, tears streaming down her face. I sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I've been so blind, she sobbed. So stupid. No, I soothed, stroking her hair as I had when she was small. You trusted someone you loved. That's never stupid. I let him turn me against you, she whispered. My own mother. We all make mistakes, Emily. The question is what we do after we recognize them. She looked up at me, her eyes red but clearer somehow, as if a fog had lifted. I don't know if I can fix this, any of this. We'll figure it out together, I promised. One day at a time. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, I sat at William's desk, the moonlight spilling through the window onto his photograph. You were right about him all along, I whispered to the smiling face of my husband. I wish you were here to help us through this mess. The next morning, as I was making breakfast, the phone rang. It was Michael Jenkins, the building manager from Parkview Apartments. "Mrs. Smith, I'm sorry to bother you," he began, his voice tense. "But there's a situation with Mr. Carter. He came to the apartment last night, caused quite a disturbance. Neighbors called the police." My stomach dropped. "Was anyone hurt?" "No, ma'am, but he damaged some property in the unit, broke some windows, put holes in the walls. The police took him in, but I wanted you to know since you're the owner." I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. Things were escalating faster than I'd anticipated. When Emily came downstairs, I had to tell her. Her face crumpled at first, but then something resolved in her expression. "I need to see it," she said firmly. "I need to see what he's done." We drove to the apartment complex in silence. Michael met us in the lobby, keys in hand. "It's pretty bad, Mrs. Smith," he warned. "The police said he was shouting about being cheated, about losing everything. The apartment that Emily had once been so proud of was now a disaster zone. Shattered glass crunched beneath our feet as we entered. The walls bore jagged holes. Family photos lay broken on the floor, and furniture had been overturned. But what caught my eye were the papers scattered everywhere. Bank statements, loan applications, betting slips. Emily moved through the wreckage like a sleepwalker, touching things gently as if to confirm they were real. She picked up a framed photo of their wedding day. The glass cracked across James's smiling face. "I don't even know who that man is anymore," she said softly, as we gathered her essential belongings. Emily found a locked drawer in James's desk that had somehow survived his rampage. Using a hairpin, she managed to open it, an old trick I'd taught her when she was 12 and had lost the key to her diary. Inside was a folder labeled Smith House, Appraisal and Sale. Emily's hands shook as she opened it. "He had it all planned out," she whispered, spreading the papers on the floor between us. "Floor plans for renovations after they got you out. Estimates for how much they could sell it for. Even brochures for that retirement home. But there was more. Buried beneath these were documents Emily had supposedly signed, power of attorney forms, health directives, even a statement claiming I was showing signs of dementia. "I never signed these," Emily said, her voice rising in panic. "Never he forged my signature." I took the papers from her trembling hands. "We need to take these to the police," I said, "and to my lawyer." Back at home, after calling both the police and Olivia West, Emily and I sat at the kitchen table. The magnitude of James's deception had left us both shaken. "How could I not have seen this coming?" Emily asked, her voice hollow. "There must have been signs. Manipulative people are experts at hiding their true nature," I said gently. "They show you what you want to see." "I gave up teaching for him," she said, the realization seeming to hit her anew. "He said my career was holding us back, that his job was more important. I believed him." "You can always go back," I reminded her. "You were a wonderful teacher, Emily." A small smile flickered across her face. "The kids at Roosevelt Elementary still send me Christmas cards." The smile faded. "But with the baby coming?" "One challenge at a time," I said, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "First, we deal with James. Then we plan for your future, both of yours." The doorbell rang again, and this time it was Olivia, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression of grim determination. "I've reviewed the documents you mentioned on the phone," she said as I led her into the living room. "We need to act quickly." Emily joined us, and Olivia laid out our options. James could face charges for forgery, fraud, and potentially domestic abuse given the destruction of the apartment. But pressing charges would mean a public trial, exposure, stress, all things that could complicate Emily's pregnancy. "There's another option," Olivia said, opening her briefcase. "William set up a trust with specific provisions for situations like this. We can leverage that to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" Emily asked. "A clean break," Olivia explained. "James walks away from any claim on your mother's property, on your marriage assets, on any future inheritance. In exchange, we settle his immediate debts and provide a modest one-time payment, enough for him to start over somewhere else." "Why would we give him anything?" Emily's voice was tight with anger. "After what he tried to do." Because litigation is expensive and stressful, Olivia replied pragmatically, and because sometimes the cleanest cut heals fastest. I watched my daughter struggle with this, the practical solution warring with her sense of betrayal. "It's your decision, Emily," I said. "He's your husband, and it's your future at stake." She placed a protective hand over her belly. "And my child's future." After a long moment, she nodded. "Make the offer. I want him gone." Olivia left with our approval to draft the settlement offer. Emily and I spent the rest of the day in quiet activities around the house. She sorting through the belongings we'd rescued from the apartment, me preparing comfort food for dinner. The normalcy was soothing, a reminder that life could go on after upheaval. That evening, as we washed dishes side by side, Emily broke our companionable silence. "I keep thinking about Dad," she said, scrubbing a pot with more force than necessary. "How he knew. How he tried to protect you from what was coming." "Your father always saw people clearly," I replied. "It was his gift." "Did he see me clearly?" she asked, her voice small. "Did he know I would betray you like this?" I set down the plate I was drying and turned to face her. "Emily, look at me. Your father loved you completely. He knew you might make mistakes, but he also knew your heart. He would have forgiven you in an instant, just as I have." "I don't deserve it," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving," I told her, wiping a tear from her cheek. "It's about love and second chances." She leaned into me then, and I held my daughter as she cried, for her broken marriage, for her mistakes, for the years we'd lost to James's influence, but also, I hoped, for the new beginning that lay ahead. The next morning brought unexpected news. James had been arrested again, this time for attempting to break into our house during the night. A neighbor had spotted him trying to force the back door and called the police. "He was carrying documents," the officer explained when he came to take our statement. "Plans of your house, financial papers. Says he was just trying to get his things, but given the restraining order his wife filed yesterday," Emily's face had gone pale. "I just filed that restraining order yesterday afternoon. How did he even know about it so soon?" The officer looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, in these domestic situations, information sometimes leaks. Could be a clerk, could be someone he knows at the courthouse." After he left, Emily paced the living room. "He's not going to stop, Mom. He's desperate now." I thought about what Olivia had said, about clean breaks and fresh starts. "Maybe we need to change our approach," I said slowly. "Negotiation might not be enough." We called Olivia, who arrived within the hour, bringing with her a stern-looking man she introduced as Robert Chen, a private investigator who had worked with William in the past. "James Carter has a history of erratic behavior when cornered," Robert explained, laying out a file on our coffee table. "His gambling issues go back further than you might think. There were incidents at his previous workplace, money missing from accounts he managed. They let him go quietly," Olivia added. "No charges filed. William discovered this during his background check, which is why he never trusted James." Emily looked stricken. "So his job before the one he just lost, that ended because of theft." Robert nodded grimly. "And there's more. The cabin he mentioned, it's not in foreclosure because he couldn't make payments. It's in foreclosure because he took out a second mortgage without proper documentation. The bank is investigating potential fraud." "He's drowning," I murmured. "No wonder he was so desperate to get his hands on this house." "We need to use this information," Olivia said firmly. "Not to negotiate, but to end this cleanly. If James knows we have evidence of his past fraudulent activities that could send him to prison, he might take the settlement and disappear," Emily finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. Robert outlined a plan, a meeting with James, his lawyer, and a mediator, all the evidence laid out, a clear choice presented: take the settlement and leave our lives forever, or face prosecution for all his crimes, past and present. "It seems so cold," Emily said after they'd gone, leaving us to consider the plan. "Using threats to force him away. Is it any colder than what he tried to do to us?" I asked gently. Sometimes protection requires firmness. Emily, your father understood that. She nodded slowly. When should we do it? As soon as possible, I said. The longer this drags on, the more desperate James will become. 2 days later, we gathered in a conference room at Olivia's office. James sat across from us, looking haggard but defiant. His lawyer, a young man who seemed increasingly uncomfortable as the meeting progressed, kept whispering urgently in his ear. Olivia presented our case methodically, laying out document after document, the forged papers, the fraudulent loan applications, the evidence of embezzlement from his previous job that had never been reported to the authorities. Here is our offer, Mr. Carter, she said finally, sliding a folder across the table. A clean settlement, your debts cleared, a fresh start fund of $50,000. In exchange, you relinquish all claims to any property owned by Linda or Emily Smith, sign the divorce papers we've prepared, and agree to move at least 500 miles away from Riverton. James's face had grown paler with each revelation. Now he looked at Emily, something like desperation in his eyes. Emily, you can't do this. We're having a baby. We're a family. Emily met his gaze steadily. No, James, we're not a family. Not anymore. You made sure of that when you tried to steal from my mother, when you forged my signature, when you lied to me for years. If you refuse this offer, Olivia continued calmly, we will proceed with criminal charges for forgery, fraud, attempted theft, and violation of a restraining order. The documentation of your previous indiscretions will be provided to the prosecutor. James's lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically. James shook his head, but with less conviction now. You have 24 hours to decide, Olivia concluded, standing to signal the end of the meeting. As we prepared to leave, James called out, Emily, wait. She paused, looking back at the man she had once loved enough to marry. I did love you, he said, his voice cracking. In my way? Your way wasn't good enough, she replied softly. Not for me, and certainly not for our child. Outside, in the safety of Olivia's car, Emily finally broke down. I feel like I've been living with a stranger for 3 years, she sobbed. Like everything was a lie. I held her close, this daughter who had found her strength again. Not everything, I assured her. The love you gave was real. The person you are, that's real. And this baby, this new life, that's as real as it gets. That night, as a spring storm rattled the windows of our home, Emily and I sat in the kitchen drinking chamomile tea. The old house creaked and settled around us, a familiar symphony that had always brought me comfort. I keep thinking about what happens next, Emily said, cupping her mug in both hands. After the divorce, after the baby comes, what my life looks like now. What do you want it to look like? I asked. She considered this, her face thoughtful in the soft kitchen light. I want to teach again. I miss the classroom, the kids. And I want this baby to grow up knowing what real love looks like. Not the controlling kind James showed, but the steady, supportive kind Dad gave you. Then that's what we'll work toward, I said simply. You make it sound so easy, she sighed. Not easy, I corrected. Just possible, one step at a time. The next day, James accepted our offer. The papers were signed, the agreements made. Within a week, he had left Riverton. The divorce proceedings would take longer, but with his signed consent already in hand, it was only a matter of time. Emily moved fully into our house, no longer a temporary arrangement, but a new beginning. We converted the study into a nursery, painting the walls a soft green that reminded me of spring leaves. Each brushstroke felt like healing, like reclaiming something precious that had almost been lost. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard Emily cry out from upstairs. I rushed to find her sitting on the nursery floor, surrounded by open boxes. Emily, are you all right, the baby? We're fine, Mom, she assured me quickly. Look what I found. In her hands was a small quilt, faded but beautifully made, with a pattern of moons and stars. I recognized it immediately. Your baby blanket, I whispered. I made it when I was pregnant with you. I remember it, Emily said, running her fingers over the stitches. You used to wrap me in it when I had nightmares. You said it was full of love that would keep the bad dreams away. I knelt beside her, touching the soft fabric. And now it can do the same for your little one. Emily looked up at me, her eyes bright. I want to be the kind of mother you are. Patient, kind, strong. You will be, I assured her. And on the days when it's hard, I'll be right here to remind you. As weeks passed, our lives settled into a new rhythm. Emily began taking online courses to renew her teaching certification. I continued meetings with Olivia, learning to manage the unexpected wealth William had left me. The house that James had tried to take from me became a true home again, filled with purpose and hope. Emily's pregnancy progressed, her body changing, her face softening with anticipation. At her 20-week appointment, we learned she was having a girl. On the drive home, she was quieter than usual. What are you thinking about? I asked. Names, she replied. I was thinking, if it's okay with you, I'd like to name her Willow. Willow, I repeated, surprised. For Dad, William. A way to honor him, to keep him part of her life even though they'll never meet. Tears pricked my eyes as I reached over to squeeze her hand. He would have loved that, and her. That evening, as I watered William's violets on the windowsill, I noticed something remarkable. A plant that hadn't bloomed in years had put forth a single perfect purple flower. You see that, William? I whispered. Life goes on, in ways we never could have imagined. 2 months after James left, we received news that would change everything once again. Robert Chen called early one morning, his usually measured voice urgent. Mrs. Smith, is Emily with you? Yes, she's right here. What's wrong? I've been monitoring James Carter's activities, as we discussed. He's been spotted back in Riverton, despite our agreement, and he's been asking questions about you, about Emily, about the house. My blood ran cold. What kind of questions? About the extent of your assets, about William's investments. I think someone may have tipped him off that there's more than just the house at stake. Emily, hearing my side of the conversation, had gone pale. He's coming back for more, she whispered. After hanging up, we called Olivia immediately. Her response was swift and decisive. We need to file for an immediate injunction, she said. And I think it's time to contact Richard Anderson. The judge, I asked, confused. William had mentioned him in some of his papers, but I hadn't made the connection before. Yes, he and William were close friends. Richard has been following your situation from a distance, out of respect for your privacy. But given these developments, I think he would want to help. That afternoon, we sat in Judge Richard Anderson's chambers. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled at me. Linda Smith, he said warmly. William spoke of you often. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. I studied his face, trying to place him in my memories. Did we ever meet, Judge Anderson, when William was alive? Once at a charity dinner. You probably wouldn't remember. There were hundreds of people. But William pointed you out, said you were the reason for everything he did. Something in his tone made me believe him completely. This wasn't just professional courtesy. This was a man who had genuinely respected my husband. Now, he continued, his tone becoming businesslike, Olivia has filled me in on the situation with James Carter. His return to Riverton violates your settlement agreement, which gives us grounds to act. What can we do? Emily asked, her hand protectively covering her growing belly. Legally, quite a lot, Judge Anderson replied. But I'm concerned about the strain on both of you, especially in your condition. Young lady, he turned to me. Linda, William once told me that if anything happened to him, I should look out for you. I didn't intervene earlier because you seemed to be handling things remarkably well. But now I'm offering my help, not just as a judge, but as someone who respected your husband greatly. We need to end this, I said firmly. Once and for all. Judge Anderson nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. Then here's what we'll do. The plan was simple but effective. Through official channels, James would be informed that his presence in Riverton violated the settlement agreement, rendering it null and void. All financial support would cease immediately, and criminal charges would be filed. Simultaneously, he would receive an invitation to a meeting at the courthouse, a chance to renegotiate before things became irreversibly worse. He'll come, Olivia predicted. His type always believes they can talk their way out of trouble. And when he does, Judge Anderson added grimly, he'll find himself facing not just civil penalties, but a formal hearing on his violations. Will I have to be there? Emily asked, worry creasing her brow. No, I said firmly, before anyone else could answer. You won't face him again. I'll handle this. Mom, she began to protest, but I shook my head. This is what your father would have wanted. For me to protect you. To finish what he started. As we left the courthouse, the weight of what lay ahead settled on my shoulders. But it was a weight I could bear now, strengthened by truth, by love, by the knowledge that I was no longer alone in this fight. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, I sat at William's desk and wrote him a letter he would never read. My dearest William, I understand now why you did what you did. The secrets you kept, the protections you put in place. You saw what I couldn't or wouldn't see. You knew that someday I might need to stand on my own, to fight not just for myself, but for our family. I wish you could see Emily now. She's finding her way back to herself, to the strong, loving woman we raised. And soon there will be a grandchild, a little girl named Willow, carrying your legacy forward. Tomorrow I face a battle you tried to spare me from. But I'm not afraid. You gave me everything I need to win, not just resources, but courage. The knowledge that I am worthy of defense. I miss you every day, but in fighting this fight, I feel closer to you than I have since you left. All my love. Linda, I folded the letter and placed it in the box with William's violets. Then I went to bed, ready for whatever the morning would bring. What I didn't know then was that fate had one more surprise in store, one that would change everything when I walked into that courtroom the next day. The morning of the courthouse meeting dawned clear and bright, a sharp contrast to the storm of emotions within me. I dressed carefully in a simple blue suit I'd worn to William's funeral, a reminder of what I was fighting for, of the man who had protected me even beyond death. Emily insisted on driving me despite my objections. I won't come inside, she promised, but I need to be nearby. For my own peace of mind, we rode in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. When we arrived at the courthouse, Emily squeezed my hand. You don't have to do this alone, Mom. I'm not alone, I assured her, touching the folder of documents in my purse. Your father made sure of that. The courthouse was imposing, all marble columns and stern authority. Olivia West met me at the entrance, her usual calm demeanor bolstered by an air of determination. James arrived 10 minutes ago, she informed me. He brought a new lawyer, younger, more aggressive than the last one. Is Judge Anderson ready for us? I asked. Olivia nodded. Everything is in place. Remember, Linda, no matter what James says, no matter how he tries to manipulate the situation, you have truth on your side. We walked through the echoing hallways, our footsteps a steady rhythm that helped calm my racing heart. Outside courtroom C, Robert Chen waited with a nod of encouragement. Mrs. Smith, he said respectfully, I'll be right behind you. The courtroom itself was smaller than I'd expected, intimate almost. James sat at one table with his lawyer, a sharp-featured young man in an expensive suit. They were deep in whispered conversation when we entered, but James's head snapped up at the sound of the door. Our eyes met across the room, and I was surprised to see not anger, but calculation in his gaze. Olivia guided me to our table, arranging her files with practiced efficiency. The room filled gradually, court officers, a stenographer, Robert Chen taking a seat in the back row. A nervous energy permeated the space, like the air before a thunderstorm. At precisely 10 a.m., the bailiff called for us to rise. The Honorable Judge Richard Anderson presiding. The side door opened and Judge Anderson entered, his black robes lending him an air of solemn authority. He took his seat at the bench, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on me with a nearly imperceptible nod. "Be seated," he instructed. "This is a preliminary hearing regarding the violation of settlement terms between Linda Smith and James Carter. Let the record show that both parties are present with counsel." He shuffled some papers, then looked directly at James. "Mr. Carter, you were explicitly prohibited from returning to Riverton as part of your settlement agreement. Yet here you are. Would you care to explain?" James's lawyer rose smoothly. "Your Honor, my client has compelling reasons for his return. We have evidence that material facts were withheld during settlement negotiations." "What material facts would those be?" "Counselor," Judge Anderson asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "The true extent of Mrs. Smith's assets. Your Honor, we believe she and her late husband engaged in deliberate concealment of wealth to defraud my client's wife, their daughter, of her rightful inheritance." I felt my cheeks flush with indignation, but Olivia's hand on my arm kept me seated and silent. "That's a serious allegation," Judge Anderson noted. "Do you have evidence to support it?" The lawyer smiled confidently. "We do, Your Honor. We've obtained bank records indicating transfers of substantial sums shortly before William Smith's death, transfers that suggest an attempt to hide assets that should rightfully have been included in his estate." My mind raced. What records could they possibly have found William had been meticulous in his planning? Judge Anderson glanced at me, then back to James's lawyer. "I'll review these records. But first, I should disclose something to the court." He paused, then continued deliberately. "I knew William Smith personally. We served together on several charitable boards, and I was familiar with his financial practices." James's lawyer faltered visibly. "Your Honor, that would seem to be a conflict." "I'm not finished, Counselor," Judge Anderson interrupted firmly. "My acquaintance with the deceased gives me particular insight into this case. William Smith was known for his integrity and financial transparency. Any suggestion that he engaged in fraudulent activity would require extraordinary proof." The lawyer recovered quickly. "With all due respect, Your Honor, given your personal connection to the family, perhaps this case should be reassigned to ensure impartiality." Judge Anderson considered this, then nodded. "A fair point. However, before I make that determination, I'd like to hear from Mrs. Smith's counsel." Olivia rose with calm confidence. "Your Honor, we welcome scrutiny of William Smith's financial dealings. In fact, we've prepared a complete accounting of all assets in question." She approached the bench with a thick folder. "These documents will show that all transfers were legitimate, properly reported to tax authorities, and designed to protect assets, not conceal them." As Judge Anderson accepted the folder, the courtroom door opened quietly. I didn't turn to look, assuming it was just another court official, but then Judge Anderson glanced up, and I saw his expression change subtly. He froze for a moment, his eyes widening in recognition. "It's her," he said, his voice barely audible. I turned then, confused by his reaction. A woman had entered and taken a seat in the back row, an elegant woman in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair. There was something familiar about her, but I couldn't place her. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. James and his lawyer exchanged puzzled glances. "Your Honor," James's lawyer prompted, clearly confused by the interruption. Judge Anderson collected himself visibly. "My apologies. Let's proceed." But his eyes kept drifting to the woman in the back row, and I felt a strange shift in the atmosphere of the courtroom. For the next hour, both sides presented arguments. James's lawyer claimed Emily had been coerced into signing the divorce papers, that she was being manipulated by me, that the settlement was grossly unfair given the newly discovered assets. Olivia countered with evidence of James's deception, the forged documents, the hidden gambling debts, the fraudulent loan applications. The back and forth continued, but I sensed Judge Anderson's attention wasn't fully engaged. He kept glancing at the mysterious woman, a strange mix of emotions crossing his face. Finally, during a brief recess, Olivia leaned close to me. "Do you know who that woman is?" she whispered. "The one who came in late." I shook my head. "She seems familiar, but I can't place her." "That's Eleanor Winters," Olivia said. "Judge Anderson's former fiancée from law school. They were engaged 30 years ago, then suddenly broke it off. No one ever knew why. My breath caught. 30 years ago, around the time William and I were first married, when I was working as a secretary at the courthouse to put him through his business courses. A distant memory stirred. A young law clerk, shy and overwhelmed, crying in the break room late one evening. Me, staying after hours to comfort him, bringing him coffee, helping him organize the mountain of briefs his supervisor had dumped on him. Marcus. His name had been Marcus Ellery. Judge Anderson's first name, I asked urgently. Is it Marcus? Olivia looked surprised. Yes, Richard Marcus Anderson. Why? Before I could answer, the bailiff called us back to order. Judge Anderson returned to the bench. His demeanor noticeably changed. More focused. More determined. Having reviewed the evidence presented by both sides, he began, I find that Mr. Carter has indeed violated the terms of his settlement agreement. Furthermore, I find his allegations regarding concealed assets to be without merit. James's lawyer started to object, but Judge Anderson silenced him with a raised hand. I'm not finished, Counselor. Given the seriousness of Mr. Carter's violations and the evidence of his prior attempts to defraud Mrs. Smith, I am ordering the immediate reinstatement of all criminal charges that were conditionally dropped as part of the settlement agreement. James half rose from his seat, his face flushing with anger. You can't do that. This is a setup. Sit down, Mr. Carter, Judge Anderson commanded, his voice sharp. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. James subsided, but his eyes burned with fury as Judge Anderson continued. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order prohibiting Mr. Carter from approaching within 500 yards of Linda Smith, Emily Smith, their residence, or any property owned by either of them. Olivia squeezed my hand under the table, a silent celebration of victory. Court officers will escort Mr. Carter to the processing area, where he will be formally charged with forgery, fraud, and violation of court orders. Bail will be set at the hearing tomorrow morning. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as two officers approached James, who sat in stunned disbelief. His lawyer was frantically whispering in his ear, but James seemed beyond hearing. As the officers led James away, his eyes locked with mine one last time. The look he gave me wasn't just anger, it was hatred, pure and cold. A shiver ran through me, but I held his gaze steadily until he was gone. Judge Anderson stood. This court is adjourned. Mrs. Smith, Ms. West, would you please remain for a moment? As the courtroom cleared, I noticed the mysterious woman, Eleanor Winters, slip quietly out the back door. Judge Anderson watched her go, a fleeting expression of regret crossing his face before he composed himself and gestured for us to approach the bench. When we were alone except for the bailiff, Judge Anderson stepped down to our level. Mrs. Smith, he said, his formal tone softening. I owe you an explanation. Your Honor, I questioned, uncertain. 30 years ago, I was a clerk at this very courthouse, overwhelmed, underprepared, and nearly ready to quit law altogether. A kind secretary stayed late one night to help me organize a case that had been dumped on me by a senior clerk. She brought me coffee, showed me how to sort the briefs efficiently, and told me I had what it took to succeed if I just believed in myself. My eyes widened as the memory crystallized. Marcus, I said softly. The Harland case. You were so tired you could barely see straight. He nodded, a smile warming his austere features. That secretary was you, Mrs. Smith. You saved my career that night. And now, after all these years, I finally have the chance to repay that kindness. Olivia looked between us, clearly surprised by this revelation. But the case, I said. The ruling, was it fair? Absolutely. Judge Anderson assured me. James Carter broke the law repeatedly. The evidence against him is overwhelming. My personal knowledge of you and your husband only confirmed what the facts already showed, that you are the wronged party here, and justice demanded I rule accordingly. He glanced toward the door where Eleanor had exited. Seeing her today, after so many years, it brought everything back. How close I came to giving up. How one act of kindness changed the course of my life. I don't understand, I said gently. What does Eleanor have to do with this? A shadow crossed his face. After you helped me with the Harlan case, I gained the confidence to pursue my career seriously. Eleanor and I were engaged, but she wanted me to join her father's corporate firm. I chose public service instead, became a prosecutor, then a judge. She couldn't accept that choice, and we parted ways. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. He shook his head. Don't be. I made the right decision, though seeing her today, he straightened, professional once more. In any case, Mrs. Smith, you should know that James Carter won't trouble you again. The charges against him are serious, and with his history, he's facing substantial prison time. As Olivia and I left the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in months. James could no longer threaten us. Emily and her baby were safe. The house that had been our home for decades would remain so. Emily was waiting anxiously in the car. When she saw my face, she burst into tears of relief. It's over, she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. It's over, I confirmed, taking her hand. James is being charged. He can't come near us again. She leaned her head against the steering wheel, her shoulders shaking with emotion. I rubbed her back gently, giving her time to process everything. What happens now? She finally asked, wiping her eyes. Now we go home, I said simply, and we start building the future. That evening, as Emily rested upstairs, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Judge Anderson. Mrs. Smith, I hope I'm not disturbing you, he began formally. Not at all, Judge, and please, call me Linda. Linda, then, and I'm Marcus, at least outside the courtroom. He paused, then continued. I wanted to let you know that Eleanor, Ms. Winters, asked about you after the hearing. She remembered you as well, from those days at the courthouse. She did. I was surprised. I barely remembered her, just a glimpse of an elegant young woman who sometimes picked Marcus up after work. Yes, she suggested, well, she thought perhaps you might be interested in joining us for dinner sometime, to talk about old times. The invitation caught me off guard. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to intrude on your reunion. It's not an intrusion, he assured me. In fact, Eleanor specifically mentioned wanting to thank you. It seems I told her, years ago, about the secretary who saved my career. She says she was jealous then, but now she understands what a pivotal moment that was. I found myself smiling. Then I'd be delighted to join you both. After we hung up, I sat in William's chair, thinking about the strange circles life sometimes travels. How a small kindness offered 30 years ago had returned when I needed it most. How William's foresight had protected Emily and me long after he was gone. You were right, William, I whispered to the empty room. Everything does come full circle eventually. Over the following weeks, our lives settled into a new pattern. Emily's pregnancy progressed smoothly. She enrolled in online courses to renew her teaching certification, determined to restart her career once the baby was born. The dinner with Marcus and Eleanor proved surprisingly enjoyable. Eleanor, now a retired corporate attorney, was warm and forthright about her past mistakes. I was young and ambitious in all the wrong ways, she admitted over dessert. I couldn't see the value in Marcus's public service because I was too focused on status and money. And now, I asked gently. She smiled, glancing at Marcus. Now I know better. We've both lived full lives, made our choices. But it's nice to reconnect and see that some things, the important things, haven't changed. I understood what she meant. Despite all that had happened, despite James's betrayal and Emily's temporary estrangement, the core of who we were remained intact. Changed, perhaps. Stronger, definitely, but still essentially ourselves. As Emily's due date approached, I found myself thinking more and more about what would come next. The house that James had tried to take from me now felt too large for just Emily, her baby, and me. And the wealth William had left. It seemed wrong somehow to keep it all to ourselves when so many others faced situations similar to what we had endured. One morning, as Emily and I shared breakfast, I broached the subject that had been growing in my mind. I've been thinking about making some changes, I began cautiously. Emily looked up from her prenatal vitamins. What kind of changes? This house has served us well, but it's more space than we need. And there are other women out there, older women like me, who are being pushed aside, made to feel like burdens by the very people who should protect them." Emily nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "What are you thinking?" "Mom, I want to use part of your father's legacy to establish a foundation, a place where women who have been abandoned or abused in their later years can find refuge, support, and dignity." "That's a beautiful idea," Emily said softly. "Dad would be so proud." "I thought we could call it the Second Porch Foundation," I continued, warming to the subject. "Because every woman deserves another place to sit, to breathe, and to belong when her first porch has been taken away." Emily reached across the table to squeeze my hand, her eyes bright with tears. "I love it, and I want to help." Over the next month, with Olivia's guidance, we set the foundation in motion. We purchased a large Victorian house on the edge of town and began renovations to turn it into a residence for women in need. The work gave purpose to our days, a focus beyond our own troubles. I found myself energized in a way I hadn't been since William's death. Each decision, from the color of the walls to the arrangement of the garden, felt meaningful, part of creating something lasting and good. Emily threw herself into the project too, designing a children's playroom for visiting grandchildren and creating a library filled with resources on legal rights, financial literacy, and emotional healing. The first residents arrived 2 weeks before Emily's due date. 3 women whose stories echoed aspects of my own. Margaret, whose son had sold her home without permission while she was hospitalized. Dorothy, whose husband of 40 years had left her for a younger woman, freezing their joint accounts. And Sophia, who had fled an abusive relationship with nothing but the clothes on her back. Watching them begin to heal, to find their voices again, was like witnessing small miracles daily. They formed a tight-knit community, supporting each other through tears and laughter, sharing skills and stories. Margaret, a former accountant, helped Dorothy untangle her financial situation. Dorothy, an avid gardener, showed Sophia how to nurture the flowers in our backyard. Sophia, who had been a teacher like Emily, tutored Margaret's grandson when he visited. As for me, I found a new identity beyond widow or victim. I became a mentor, an advocate, a force for change in our community. The local newspaper ran a story about the foundation, bringing attention to the often invisible plight of older women facing abuse and abandonment. Letters began to pour in from around the country, women sharing similar experiences, asking for help or offering support. Each one reinforced what I already knew: what had happened to me wasn't unique or rare. It was a silent epidemic, hidden behind closed doors and social expectations that older women should acquiesce, should sacrifice, should fade quietly away. "We need to expand," I told Olivia during one of our regular meetings. "There are so many women who need this." She smiled, unsurprised. William would say the same thing. He always believed in using resources to create meaningful change. "He never told me about his philanthropy," I mused. "Another secret he kept." "Not a secret," Olivia corrected gently. "Just another way he tried to protect you from worrying. He funded scholarships, small business grants, community programs, always anonymously, always with the stipulation that the money go to those who truly needed it." A warmth spread through me at this new glimpse of the man I had loved for so many years. "Then we'll continue that legacy," I decided. "Expand the foundation, create more second porch homes, help as many women as we can." On a bright June morning, as I was reviewing plans for our second location, Emily's water broke. The rush to the hospital, the hours of labor, the anxious waiting, all of it passed in a blur of emotion and anticipation. When the nurse finally placed my granddaughter in my arms, I felt the circle of life complete itself once more. Willow Smith, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with her grandfather's determined chin and her mother's curious eyes. "Hello, little one," I whispered, touching her perfect tiny fingers. "You have quite a story to inherit." Emily watched us from her hospital bed, exhausted but radiant. "What do you think Dad would say if he could see her?" I smiled, knowing the answer with absolute certainty. He'd say she's perfect, and that he's been watching over her, over all of us, all along. In the days that followed, our home filled with the sounds of new life, Willow's cries and coos, Emily's lullabies, the gentle rhythm of rocking chairs and midnight feedings. The three of us settled into a new normal, 3 generations of Smith women supporting each other through this latest transition. 5 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. The garden in Riverton was alive with color. My granddaughter Willow, now 4 years old, ran barefoot across the grass, chasing butterflies, her laughter echoing through the yard. Emily stood at the porch steps, her hands dusted with flour from preparing Sunday lunch. She had rebuilt her life, returning to teaching and finding joy in both her classroom and her role as a mother. The Second Porch Foundation had grown beyond my wildest dreams. 3 homes now operated across the state, with plans for a 4th underway. Dozens of women had found safety and dignity within their walls. Some stayed briefly until they could secure their independence. Others became permanent residents, contributing to the community we had built together. That afternoon, an envelope arrived addressed to me. It was an invitation to the dedication of our newest Second Porch home. Dozens more women would soon find safety and dignity within its walls. Later that week, Judge Marcus Anderson visited with Eleanor, who had become a dear friend and volunteer at the foundation. He smiled warmly and said, "Linda, your work has inspired us all. The Retired Judges Association wants to honor you for what you've built." As Willow climbed into my lap holding a yellow flower, I realized how far we had come. Pain had been turned into legacy, and love had survived its hardest test. Looking back, I see now that true strength was never in shouting or fighting louder. It was in standing calmly with the truth in my hands, refusing to be erased. William's letter had told me to use power not to hurt, but to teach. And that is what I tried to do. Emily learned that respect cannot be forced, and I learned that dignity is something we must protect for ourselves. If my story reminds you of your own, know this: you are not powerless. Even in the darkest moments, there is always a way to reclaim your voice, your place, and your worth. Sometimes life circles back with unexpected kindness, the way Judge Anderson remembered me after decades. Sometimes the victory is simply refusing to be pushed aside. James served 3 years for his crimes. Upon his release, he left the state as required and never contacted us again. I heard he remarried eventually, and I truly hope he found the peace and purpose that had eluded him before. Revenge was never my goal, only justice and protection for those I loved. As for me, I discovered that there is a difference between getting older and growing old. The first is inevitable, the second is a choice. I chose to grow, to learn, to build something that would outlast me. William would have wanted that, a legacy not just of material wealth, but of positive change in the world. Every morning, I still rise at 6 a.m., I still brew my coffee in that chipped blue mug, I still tend to William's violets on the windowsill. But now, I do these things not out of lonely habit, but as reminders of the journey that brought me here, to this place of purpose, fulfillment, and deep, abiding joy. If you found meaning in my story, I invite you to share it. Leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Together, we can keep these lessons alive, reminding the world that dignity never expires, that we are never too old to stand up for ourselves, and that the most beautiful chapters of our lives may be the ones we haven't written yet. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to reclaim your dignity from someone who tried to take it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below.